first, and all my dear beloved colleagues for your love and tenderness, which my family and I will never forget. Thank you again. Abraham Lincoln, whose name is a comfort to us all, said, "We've got the best government the world ever knew." It's best because the first three words of the Constitution tell us who governs here: we the people. Watch this proceeding today and tell the world with pride, as Lincoln did, about the brilliant meaning and promise of our country. Our government belongs to the people. As President Ford said, "Here the people rule." Today, we are in the people's house to complete the people's process for choosing the people's president. We assemble in joint session for a solemn purpose that we've all sworn a sacred oath to faithfully discharge. The 12th Amendment obligates each and every one of us to count the electoral votes to recognize the will of the people in the 2020 presidential election. We are not here, Madam Speaker, to vote for the candidate we want. We are here to recognize the candidate the people actually voted for in the states. Madam Speaker, the 2020 election is over, and the people have spoken. Joe Biden received more than 80 million votes, 7 million more than President Trump, a number larger than any other president has received in U.S. history. This sweeping popular victory translated into an electoral college victory of 306 to 232, a margin which President Trump pronounced a landslide when he won by those exact same numbers in 2016. So now we count the electoral votes that were just delivered to us in the beautiful mahogany cases brought by those hardworking Senate pages. These mahogany cases contain only the 538 electoral votes that were sent in by the states, not the 159 million ballots that were cast by our constituents. Those were counted 2 months ago by hundreds of thousands of election officials and poll workers across America who risked their health and even their lives in the time of COVID to deliver what our Department of Homeland Security called the most secure election in American history. Many of these officials have endured threats of retribution, violence, and even death just for doing their jobs. Just as the popular vote was for Biden, so was the electoral vote. On December 15th, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell recognized it. The Electoral College has spoken. Senator McConnell said from the Senate floor, "Today I want to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden." Yet we have seen escalating attacks on our election with unfounded claims of fraud and corruption. More than 60 lawsuits have been brought to date seeking to overturn the results. They have failed repeatedly and they have failed spectacularly. Every objection we hear today maligning our states and their officials, both Republican and Democrat, has been litigated, adjudicated, and obliterated in both federal and state court. The president has not just had his day in court, my friends. He has had more than 2 months in court looking for a judge to embrace these arguments. In more than 50 cases, Madam Speaker, at least 88 different judges, including many appointed by the president himself, have meticulously rejected the president's claims of fraud and corruption. Take Georgia U.S. District Judge Stephen Grimberg, named to the bench by President Trump this year. Last year, he rejected Trump's prayer to block certification of Biden's victory in Georgia, saying it has no basis in fact or law. Take U.S. District Judge Brett Ludwig, another Trump nominee who took the bench in September. He dismissed a lawsuit seeking to overturn the results in Wisconsin, calling it extraordinary. A sitting president who did not prevail in his bid for re-election has asked for federal court help in setting aside the popular vote. based on issues he plainly could have raised before the vote occurred. He wrote, "This court has allowed plaintiff the chance to make his case, and he has lost on the merits." Trump has asked for the rule of law to be followed, Judge Ludwig observed, and he said definitively, it has been. I've been a constitutional law professor for 30 years, and if I were to test my students on these decisions, it would be the easiest test in the world, because the plaintiffs have lost nearly every case and every issue in the most sweeping terms. That's all they would have to remember. There is no basis in fact or law to justify the unprecedented relief that is being requested of nullifying these elections. We are here to count the votes. Let us do our job.
Gentleman's time to return.
I've got some serious questions to ask you. The chairman of the January 6th committee, Chairman Thompson, and John Katko, who was the emissary of Kevin McCarthy, negotiated an agreement for an independent outside commission with 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, equal subpoena power, right down the middle. And yet Donald Trump decided he didn't like it because he doesn't want anybody investigating January the 6th. So he turned against it, and then the Republican leadership flipped over and turned against it. I think you voted against that commission. Why did you vote against that commission?
For many of the reasons that I've discussed today, that the focus on January 6th, the
so you don't want to know.
Is unwarranted.
You don't want to know anymore.
Look, I think we have.
Okay, let me ask you about that.
We have a process in Article 3 where the courts get to determine those issues. If the United States government brings charges, people can resolve those in the courts.
You don't want to know.
That's not okay with you guys because you want to politicize it because you.
I know you too well for this. You don't want to know the answer. You don't want to know. No, so let me, Mr. Gates, let me ask you. Let me ask you a serious question.
The stenographer is trying to take people's words down, and she can't if everybody talks over each other. Okay. So
our apologies to the stenographer. Okay, we're going to do it civilly, like 2 lawyers. Okay, Mr. Gates, let me ask you this. Let's say that the exact same attack had taken place. Let's assume 145 of our officers were beaten in the face with baseball bats, steel pipes, Confederate battle flags, etc. Let's say they interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history for 4 or 5 hours. Let's say marauders, insurrectionists came into our building and chanted for hanging Vice President Mike Pence. But let's just change the hypothetical. This one element, Mr. Gates. Let's say it wasn't the Proud Boys. Let's say it wasn't the Oath Keepers. Let's say it wasn't the 3 percenters. Let's say it wasn't the Aryan nations. Let's say it was Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Would you really not want an investigation into what happened with that attack on America?
If Al-Qaeda or ISIS attacked the U.S. Capitol, I would think that the least capable institution to bring them to justice would be this January 6th committee.
You would not want...
I would far prefer the legal process to play out or the military process to play out. If the American people had to rely on the Congress itself as an institution to protect us from ISIS, without law enforcement, without the military, we would be in deep, deep trouble.
Okay, is that a new position for you and Mr. Jordan? Because I know you guys
have been involved... It's a new hypothetical.
Yeah, you've been involved in a lot of different investigations, both of you. For example, does Benghazi ring a bell?
I was, I believe, a law student at the Great William and Mary Law School.
All right. Well, but before I come to Mr. Jordan, let me ask you this. Do you think that people who are subpoenaed by a court or by the United States Congress, who think in their head that they might have a privilege or someone else might have a privilege, have the right just not to show up?
I believe that people have the right to allow the legal process to resolve whether
but you know how that works, Mr. Gates. You're a lawyer. You know how that works.
So.
You show up.
It works too.
Wait a second, Mr. Gates. Wait, hold on. Let's try to educate the public here.
Please.
Because people need to know. If you're subpoenaed, you go. If you think you have a privilege, for example, let's say Steve Bannon says, you know what, I'm guilty as hell. I don't want to testify against myself. In America, you don't have to. The Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination says, I plead the Fifth. I might incriminate myself, but you know what? You got to go. And you got to answer each specific question. Some of them might implicate your Fifth Amendment rights, and some of them might not. Even if he thinks he's got, in some surreal parallel universe, a presidential executive privilege, even though he didn't even work for the White House at that point. He'd been fired by Donald Trump in August of 2017. This is in January of 2021, in December of 2020. But even if he thought that, he's got to come before the committee, and he has to plead it. Do you not agree with that?
No, I think that...
No, honestly, do you not agree with that?
Mr. Raskin, I allowed you to speak, and I didn't interrupt you. I hope I'm given the same opportunity.
Just give me the honest answer.
The honest answer is that the McGahn litigation that you and I both followed closely as members of the Judiciary Committee actually is the path forward. McGahn didn't have to show up to assert that he was waiting for legal...
The president asserted executive privilege on his behalf.
Now you're the one giving challenges to the stenographer. So,
no, I'm telling you, wait a second. I'm going to elaborate on your answer here.
But I haven't even given my full answer yet.
That's not how it works in the Rules Committee, Mr. Gates. Just follow this then.
Well, wait, do I get to respond to these?
Mr. Gates, I'm going to give you the chance to respond.
Well, respond to this. Sounds like
President Trump asserted executive privilege. President Trump asserted executive privilege for McGahn. President Biden has not asserted.
I believe there is.
Has not asserted executive privilege.
President Trump has initiated litigation. Look, the reason you all waited on McGahn is because the Russia hoax wasn't going well for you, and the reason you're not waiting now is because you have no other legislation or other solutions for the country.
All right,
that's why
Mr. Jordan, let me switch.
You had the McGahn playbook, but you've ditched it because you guys need January 6th so bad.
Senate was lectured several times yesterday about cancel culture. Well, not even 2 weeks ago, the president's most reliable supporters in the House, I'm sorry, not the president, the former president's most reliable supporters in the House tried to cancel out Representative Cheney because of her courageous and patriotic defense of the Republic and the truth and the Constitution. They tried to strip her of her leading role as chair of the House Republican Conference. But you know what? I hope everybody takes a second to reflect on this. The conference rejected this plainly retaliatory and cowardly attempt to punish her for telling the truth to her constituents and her country and voting for impeachment. Who says you can't stand up against bullies? Who says? In my mind, Liz Cheney is a hero for standing up for the truth and resisting this retaliatory cancel culture that she was subjected to. But she beat them on a vote of 145 to 61, more than 2-to-1 vote.
Ms. Butler, I'd like to come to you, if I might. I heard one of our colleagues say somebody wins and somebody loses in every election. I wish they would tell that to Donald Trump. America would be a lot better off if he accepted that. But we seem to have two rival theories about what's going on in Georgia today. The way I see it is every time that there's been an advance in people's voting rights in American history, there's been a backlash against it. So after the Civil War fought to free hundreds of thousands of enslaved people and to give them the right to vote and to bring them up in the Reconstruction process, there was a reaction against that, and we saw all kinds of voting restrictions. Some of it was just violence and terror, but some of it was grandfather clauses, literacy tests, poll taxes, character tests, and so on. And these laws were instituted in order to secure the purity of the ballot, which essentially meant keeping black people from voting. And we've seen these constant efforts to undermine voting rights of African Americans in our history. And it seems pretty clear to me that what's going on in Georgia is all about the fact that Georgia just elected its first African American senator in history, Senator Warnock, that Joe Biden was the first Democratic candidate to win there in decades. That's certainly what is going on if you ask anybody on the ground in Georgia. And yet there's this rival theory out there, which is it's really about fraud, corruption, chaos, back to that old cover story for racism. And I'm wondering if you can help us sort this out, because I don't live in Georgia and I haven't been there in a long time. But I do know there were 62 lawsuits brought by Donald Trump and his supporters alleging corruption, fraud, and chaos in the 2020 election. And they were all rejected in the lowest courts in the land, circuit courts and district courts and the state level and the county courts, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. They all rejected exactly the kind of stuff we're hearing today about how there's some impurity of the ballot, some assault on the integrity of the ballot. And then I hear people actually accusing, if I'm understanding them right, the civil rights forces of racism because they are opposing efforts to restrict the ballot. So would you help us sort this out? I mean, is my sense right that this is just the conventional racist backlash against black people voting, or is there some fraud out there that no court in the land could find that's been completely rejected? I think that even Attorney General Barr described Donald Trump's claims about voter fraud as BS. And I'm being polite there. I'm not spelling it out. So let me turn it over to you, Ms. Butler.
Thank you. No, there hasn't been any fraud in Georgia. We had 3 hand counts of the ballots in Georgia. That means all 159 counties did an audit, and they did 2 recounts, hand recounts, not using equipment, but they did hand counting. We had the GBI and the FBI look at our signature match process. It was found competent. There was nothing that they found wrong with it. There was no fraud. We had an exceeding number of people turn out to vote because in this pandemic with COVID, they were able to exercise that right to vote, and they did that. And because of that, we now have these egregious laws that will take over local boards of election, take total control. When I'm on the board of election, I was on a board of election. We were responsible for counting the absentee ballots. We were responsible for making sure that the ballots were rejected or accepted. We were responsible for accepting provisional ballots, making sure the proper documentation was received. So with the entire process, to the poll workers being trained, we were responsible.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second?
Smoothest election. There was no fraud.
I want to get one other point in here. I know that during the election, or right after it was over, former President Trump called the then Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who's a Republican, and said, just find me 11,781 votes. He was trying to encourage him to commit election fraud, voter fraud. Is there anything in the legislation that the Republicans are passing that would stop Donald Trump from trying to implant false votes in Georgia? Responded to that at all?
The witness will answer very briefly because the gentleman's time's expired.
No, the law does not address that issue at all. It stops legitimate people from exercising their right to vote.
Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Mr.
Yields back. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, hundreds of people have come forward to testify about the violent and dangerous events of January the 6th. It's just a handful of people like Mr. Bannon, like Mr. Meadows, who somehow think that they're above the law. We are not a banana republic because we hold everybody to equality under the law, and we are not communists, as the gentlelady from Georgia suggested. That's just the friends of the former president who you lionize, like the dictator of North Korea, who he loves, and Vladimir Putin, who said that the greatest tragedy of the 20th century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. So those are your friends. Don't put them on our side. They're saying that the January 6th committee is out to persecute and bankrupt their opponents. On the contrary, we're out to write a report under House Resolution 503 to the American people about the most violent and sweeping, dangerous attack on the Republic since the Civil War or the War of 1812. Mr. Bannon's raising money on it. Far from bankrupting Mr. Bannon, he's trying to get rich on it. And Mark Meadows has written a book where he tells all of the stories he wants about January the 6th. It's just he doesn't want to face the rule of law and the questions of this bipartisan committee, which is making tremendous progress in terms of getting the truth of what happened on that day. I recommend to all of my colleagues who invoke the rule of law today that they read the D.C. Circuit Court of Opinion, which obliterates every single argument that they've made about executive privilege. It's basically gone now because the way the law works is the people have a right to get the information we want unless there's a compelling interest on the other side. They haven't even pretended to invoke a compelling interest. What's the compelling interest? In being able to prepare an insurrection, a coup against the government? Is that what we want to establish a precedent for? That outgoing presidents can try to organize an insurrection against the vice president and encourage people who go out and stage a riot against the vice president of the United States and the Congress? I don't think so. A couple of the speakers said there was an absence of legislative purpose. This is the central purpose of our government, to make the government survive and to go out and serve the people. That's what this committee is doing. He is in contempt, Mr. Speaker. I urge a yes vote on the rule in the previous question. I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
You're a lawyer too, right?
Nope.
Okay, I thought you'd gone to law school.
I went to law school, never took the bar exam.
Oh, gotcha.
Never sat
Okay.
for the bar exam.
Gotcha. My dad never took the bar either, so. Do you oppose the use of criminal contempt charges against people who refuse to testify before Congress?
No, we've used it. I mean, we contempt Lois Lerner after a year of hearings and investigation.
You sure did, didn't you? You
Lois
said the U.S.
Lerner.
attorney had a legal duty to go to the grand jury, didn't you?
Well, it says shall. When the Congress voted for contempt, it says shall go to the grand jury. That U.S. attorney didn't.
That's right. And
He
you
didn't
also
go.
said the U.S. attorney unilaterally decided to ignore the will of the House of Representatives.
It's true.
You said Mr. Manchin was legally bound to convene a grand jury, but indeed he ignored his obligation and unilaterally decided to ignore the will of the House of Representatives. Don't you think it's important that when we're exercising our Article I powers to get the evidence we need in order to legislate, that people obey the subpoenas of the United States House of Representatives? You used to believe that, Mr. Jordan. Do you no longer believe that?
Once a legitimate investigation, sure.
All right.
Sure.
In 2012, the Oversight Committee approved a resolution holding Attorney General Holder in contempt of Congress. Do you remember that one?
Say it again. I was thinking how I was going to elaborate on the answer when you cut me off to ask me the question again, please.
Well, continue, Mr. Jordan, because everybody's always violating your rights, so I'm going to give you all the time you want.
No one's violating my rights.
Okay. Well, look, let me remind you what you said when Attorney General Holder was held in criminal contempt of Congress. We simply want the facts, because Attorney General Eric Holder will not provide what the law requires. We are left with no other option except to hold him in contempt. We're doing the exact same thing, Mr. Jordan, with all the bluster about the border and all the other nonsense you're talking about, Russia and everything. We are holding him in contempt for violating a subpoena of the United States House of Representatives.
There wasn't some special select committee that Republicans were not permitted to serve on that issued those subpoenas. That's not the case.
All right, well, let's close with this. Mr. Jordan, why did you vote against the commission of 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats equals subpoena power? Why did you oppose that? Are you also not interested in what happened to us on January 6th?
Of course, everyone is interested in holding people accountable who did wrong. The FBI is doing that. The Justice Department is doing that appropriately. So what I'm not interested in.
Why did you have all those Benghazi investigations if you don't think Congress should be investigating?
Because Hillary Clinton misled the American people.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back to you. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
If you want to...
I've noticed there's an attack on election administrators going on. I mean, we saw that in 2020 when Donald Trump literally was calling election administrators and telling them to revise their vote totals. Most famously, of course, he called the Secretary of State in Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, and said, just go find me 11,781 votes. That's all I'm looking for. And then after that appalling attempt at election fraud was exposed to the whole world, rather than everybody apologizing for it, running from it, and trying to figure out what we do to protect election administrators, now there's an effort to displace him and run somebody against him so they have a sufficiently sycophantic and subservient Secretary of State in Georgia. It's absolutely amazing to watch that.
Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the distinguished gentlelady from Wyoming, and thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, Donald Trump said the insurrection took place on November 3rd. No, Mr. Trump, I'm sorry. That's what we call an election in America, an election that was validated by more than 60 federal and state courts, including before 8 judges nominated to the bench by President Trump himself, and all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, all of them rejecting every claim of electoral fraud and corruption that was advanced. We know an insurrection when we see one in this body because we lived through one. Under the banner of this continuing and deranged big lie, The Stop the Steal movement brought down a violent insurrection against this Congress and an attempted coup against Vice President Mike Pence. They interrupted the counting of electoral college votes for the first time in American history. They caused the worst attack on Congress since the War of 1812, and they injured and wounded more than 140 police officers, Capitol officers, Metropolitan Police Department officers, and others, breaking their noses, breaking their necks, breaking their vertebrae, breaking their arms, breaking their legs, breaking their hearts and their spirits. We are investigating the attack on American democracy because we are Americans. We are investigating the attack on Congress by domestic enemies of our Constitution because we are sworn to do so by our oaths of office. But now, the big lie has become a big cover-up. After being impeached twice by the House, after losing in 61 different courts, after seeing a 57-43 vote against him in the U.S. Senate in the most sweeping bipartisan Senate presidential conviction vote in American history, Trump now tries to get his followers like Steve Bannon not to testify here and not to turn over evidence that they have about this vicious assault on American democracy. In America, when you are subpoenaed to testify in court or in Congress, you show up, period. You can invoke your Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination to specific questions if you think you committed a crime. You can claim executive privilege to specific questions if you think you're President of the United States. But you cannot blow off a subpoena in America. You cannot sit on your couch and defy the people's representatives in Congress. So we must enforce the rule of law here, my colleagues. We must do it. If you act deliberately with sneering, cavalier contempt for the American people and their representatives, we will hold you in contempt. We will get to the truth of the violent assault on America. I yield back.
Who's next on this side? Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Representative Clyde, you're opposing the legislative appropriation?
I'm opposing the legislative appropriation.
What are you? Are you here for an amendment, or? Are you...
Yes, an amendment. I'm here for amendment number 48 to H.R. 4505.
Okay. Did you support the American Rescue Act?
I don't know that that has anything to do with.
Well, it's just my question. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to.
Well, let's just stick to the amendment.
Okay.
Mr.
Well,
Raskin.
I guess my question for you, Mr. Clyde, is: did you have an opportunity to see Officers Hodges and Fanone and Dunn testify today, or Sergeant Gunnell?
Mr. Raskin, let's stick to the amendment as the.
Well, I'm getting to the amendment. If you don't like the question, just say you can take the fifth, or you choose not to.
That's not the point.
Well, I don't need you correcting my question, sir. I'm asking, did you watch the testimony of the Capitol officers who defended our lives on January 6th, or did you not? It's a yes or no question.
It's irrelevant. It's absolutely irrelevant to this amendment right here, and I'd like to stick to it if you want to.
Then reclaiming my time, sir. Reclaiming my time.
Is that what you want to do, Mr. Chairman?
Excuse me, Mr. Clyde. I have the floor, not you.
Excuse me, everybody. First of all, the way this works, as you heard, either side can ask whatever they want to ask. Okay. You don't have to answer the question if you don't want to. I would urge everybody to kind of lower the decibel here. We're going down a road that we should. I wish we weren't, but we are.
I agree.
So you know,
Mr. Chairman, our colleagues have taken us down the road of quotations, and we have somebody who's got a quote right in the room. So I thought I would check it with him. He refuses to say whether or not he heard the Capitol officers who risked their lives and have experienced traumatic medical injuries. He refused to say whether or not he watched them today. That's fine. That's his prerogative, and under the First Amendment or the Fifth Amendment, whatever it is, he doesn't have to testify about it. But I want to ask you this. They were asked the question by several of our colleagues, including Ms. Cheney, about statements that you made saying that the January 6th violent insurrection against Congress was akin to a normal tourist visit. And those officers said they weren't tourists, they were terrorists. Do you stand by your statement that they were tourists?
I would like you to quote my exact statement, not your interpretation of my statement.
Okay. Watching the TV footage of those who entered the Capitol and walked through statuary halls showed people in an orderly fashion staying between the stanchions and ropes, taking videos and pictures. You know, if you didn't know the TV footage was a video from January 6th, you would actually think it was a normal tourist visit. Those are your words.
And I stand by that exact statement as I said it.
Okay. Do you agree or disagree with the officers who spent 4 or 5 hours battling that medieval mob that had baseball bats and lead pipes and so on? Do you stand by the statement that the people that they were fighting were tourists, or would you agree with them that they were terrorists?
That statement did not say that those people were tourists. Okay, read the statement.
Okay, well, I'm asking you now. Well, you've got the opportunity to tell America right now, Mr. Clyde.
Could we just lower our voices here? We don't. I'm sorry. I just.
Yeah, but you've got the opportunity to clarify for the whole country right now. For these officers, I urge you to watch it on TV. I urge you to watch it in your office. Officer Hodges, Officer Fanone, who experienced traumatic brain injury, who had a heart attack after he was tased by some of the tourists or terrorists. Officer Dunn, Officer Hodges. Do you think that what they experienced was an attack by tourists or terrorists or violent insurrectionists? You've got the opportunity to clarify for the whole country right now.
If you will read the first part of my statement.
I'm not interested in that. I'm asking you.
You're not interested in my statement, are you?
Mr. Chair,
you are not.
Can you yield to me for
I have read your statement once. The whole country and lots of people online believed your statement that it was a normal tourist visit.
That is not my statement.
Okay, well,
as you said, as you quoted, and then you just misquoted.
Clarify it right now for America.
I just clarified it.
Okay,
for
I'm
you.
asking you. The people who attacked Officer
You're not
Hodges.
listening to my
Mr.
statement.
Chair, are there no rules?
Reclaim my time.
govern?
Excuse me.
I'm trying to get a
Who has the floor, Mr.
parliamentary
Chairman?
It's Mr. Raskin's time, but the stenographer cannot keep track of people talking over one another. So I would like everybody to kind of lower. Yeah, those who need to leave can leave. But I do think that I just
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Raskin's time, and
thank you.
Let's not talk over each other.
Again,
Mr. Chair,
I spent several hours today with millions of Americans watching sworn police officers testify about their battle to defend our lives, the members of the House and the senators. And they took issue, not with, let's put your statement aside because you think that you've been misinterpreted by people, but they're taking issue with an internet meme that the people here were just tourists. It was a normal day. And they were saying they weren't tourists, they were terrorists. How do you react to that?
Well, I'm not responsible for an internet meme, okay? We are here to discuss this amendment, Mr. Raskin.
Okay. So you don't want to answer the question. I appreciate that. I wouldn't want to answer it if I said what you
We are here to discuss this amendment, and you are obviously not interested in that. You want to make this another January 6th hearing. This is not. This is the Rules Committee.
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Clyde. You voted no on giving congressional gold medals to the officers who defended our lives on that day. 140 of whom were wounded, injured, dozens of them in the hospital. People lost fingers, people had their eyes gouged, people experienced traumatic brain injuries, people are experiencing post-traumatic stress syndrome to this day. And you voted no on extending congressional gold medals to them. Why did you do that?
Again, that has nothing to do with this amendment. But you know what I will tell you?
Oh, I'll bring it back to the amendment, Mr. Clyde.
That I co-sponsored an amendment, a bill to give a gold medal, 3 gold medals, to the Capitol Police, all right, for all of what they've done. It was introduced by Representative Gohmert. So I'm sorry if you didn't understand that, or if you didn't maybe get that information.
Okay, I'll reclaim my time.
I am not going to vote to give
Mr. Clyde,
Speaker Pelosi
you were one of 21
she
members.
is the one who is in charge of the Capitol Police and the Sergeant at Arms. She
I'm
is
sorry,
responsible.
Mr. Clyde, I'll reclaim my time. You were one of 21 members out of 435 who voted no. You voted not to award 4 congressional gold medals to the U.S. Capitol Police and those who protected the United States Capitol on January 6th. I'm just giving you the opportunity to tell us why you were one of the 21 members who voted against it.
I just told you, and you obviously didn't listen.
No, you told me about another bill that you said you sponsored that I never heard of, but why did you vote no on this bill, which was on the floor of the House?
The particular bill on the floor of the House, all right, was not appropriate. It was not that. The bill that was appropriate is the one that I co-sponsored.
Really, what made this inappropriate?
Because it awarded those gold medals to those Capitol Police for all of the times that they have defended this Capitol. Back in the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s, not just one incident. Because I think they deserve, because there were Capitol Police officers that died from gunshot wounds back earlier. Did you know that?
So you're saying this didn't go far enough? Is that your point? So you wanted to give the gold medal to these people, but you voted against it because you wanted to give it to them?
No.
Yeah, so
Okay,
yeah.
well, with that, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say forgive me, colleagues, but I spent 4 hours today with the police officers who defended our lives on January 6th, and the level of rhetoric in this room about defunding the police and standing by the police does not stand up to what we heard this morning. And I don't accept it, and I find the rhetoric dangerous, describing anything that took place that day as analogous to tourism. And I would urge my colleague to please go back and listen to those Capitol officers and how they reacted to the idea that there was anything remotely analogous to a tourist visit in what they suffered on that day. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And again,